So this is class 14. And we're going to probably finish up discussions concerning Congress today. And by Congress, I mean, the whole two chambers. Contextually, what's going on today is the Judiciary Committee in the Senate is interviewing, I guess we'll call it, the nominee by Donald Trump, and her name is Amy Coney Barrett. I got it backwards. She is the first law school grad from Notre Dame that has been nominated. There's a reason, which it isn't surprising, but not because of Notre Dame, but because I think she is actually more than that, the first non-Harvard or Yale grad to be nominated. So if that tells you something about your job prospects on the Supreme Court, if you don't go to one of these Ivy League schools, I shall say that it is virtually nil. As a matter of fact, there's a reason people get into these schools, and it's not necessarily because it makes you smart, okay? Generally you have to be smart to get in, and on top of being smart, you have to have the backing to get you in, to get you to that academic level. And that's not to say these people, smart and cognitively gifted are two different things. You guys could have great cognitive potential that is either untapped or unrecognized. And the reason so is because, well, one, so if you go into these schools, to get into them requires most of these students to have gone through tutoring from the day they were born to the day they get into them, and then they do all these trips abroad. They do their whole life. Their parents and others spend money on them to get them into these schools. They don't just go to a public school to get in. So to get into these schools, they'll go to some of the most elite schools. There's a reason the Obamas, the Bushes, and the Trumps, and these people send their kids to these schools, okay? There's a reason. Because you're not getting, and the Clintons, of course, you're not getting into these elite schools, right? Unless you've been to elite schools. Not many people graduating from Sandia High. In English, that's Watermelon High, okay, if you speak Spanish. I'm from New Mexico. That was the name of my high school, Sandia High. I went to a public school. You're not getting these major schools. And if you're not getting these major schools, chance to be in these courts is going to be pretty slim. So it's remarkable. Now she's not in a small school, a bad school. Notre Dame is outstanding, outrageously outstanding. Her ability is without question. But again, it's just these it just tells you something. There's a bit of there's elitism, and then there's being elite. There's a difference, right? You can be elite in your ability, or you can be an elitist in your attitude, right? And it's my belief that many of the attitudes that have governed who gets into these positions has been driven by elitist attitudes. You're not from Harvard, or you're not from Yale, right? You're just from Notre Dame. Okay, that's not generally why she's being criticized today, but by her opponents. Well, anyway, so she was nominated by Donald Trump. Okay, he went to Wharton. That's UPenn, which is another elite school. Okay, and So they're in the committee now, and they're asking her questions, and most of them are not really asking her any questions, but I am going to find Lindsey Graham's opening questioning today of her, and what a great example of a committee that is at least a chair, asking great questions, okay, of the person whom they're going to basically confirm as the next Supreme Court Justice. I'll contrast that with the other side, how they're asking the questions, and you're gonna find out what a circus, okay, what an insult to the process, okay? And you'll see one side asking, you know, how are cases decided? How would a reasonable approach be to the Constitution? What is the judicial branch's role, you know, in legislation in these cases? And he's asking these really good questions that are what a great lesson. She's also a law professor at Notre Dame Law School, so she's not just a great litigator and not just a great as a lawyer, or not just a great judge, you know, on the bench. She's actually a great professor. I was listening to her, and I'm like, wow, man, she really explains that well. So I'm going to have you listen to her. So you're going to, for the judicial branch, you're going to listen to that for two things. One, you're going to hear how, you know, kind of how things work in the Supreme Court. Two, we'll get to that actually before we get to the judicial branch officially. It'll help bookend, you know, the end of Congress and the committees and some of the things they do, right? So, because this is in committee, right? This is, you know, they're confirming her, right? And so they're going to have they're going to have basically a vote, and this vote's going to come down. Who's going to see? The president nominates, and Congress, right? They're the ones who are going to end up appointing her by vote. All right, they consent to it. If they don't consent, then it doesn't pass. Now, they used to have a higher threshold than a simple majority, but they changed the rules in the Senate because Harry Reid did this. They called it the nuclear option, right? And Harry Reid didn't like that his team's picks weren't being, you know, put through, right? So they said, forget it, we're going to go nuclear, and they've changed rules to where you only needed a simple majority. Well, all of a sudden, now we got a Republican president, and they're like, we don't like who you're nominating, and we're going to vote against him, but wait a minute, you only need a simple majority now. Oh no, because now the shoe's on the other foot. And the only person you have to blame is Harry Reid, because probably wouldn't have had Kavanaugh if it weren't for Harry Reid or Neil Gorsuch, and we wouldn't have Barrett. But as it stands, all we need right now, I say we, like we're all just together, right? I'm a conservative, so to me it's like, you know, in your face. But all they need now is a simple majority to confirm her. That's 51, right? 51. If it is 50 to 50, and we have the vice president, and the vice president makes a deciding vote, he's the president of the Senate, right? In the cases of a tie, other than that, he's pretty much worthless, okay? So, who will be the deciding vote if it's 50-50? Mike Pence. Mike Pence is what? Donald J. Trump's vice president. You think he's going to vote against his president? Heck no. This lady's confirmed. Now, there's a whole lot of procedural things these guys are trying to do to stall it, and their hope is maybe to get it past the election so that Donald Trump loses, maybe. Then, you know, they can stall long enough where they just scrap her and they start over and they get a point whom they want, right? But that's all done in the Senate. There are rules, and they make their own rules, right? But then now of course, what does Congress do? What's their big job? There are two main things they do, but oversight and legislation and oversight. Okay? So we're gonna talk a little bit, it's great what they're doing today, it's cause it's meaningful. This is like all three branches of government in play right before, we're 3 weeks away from an election, right? Presidential election and congressional election, right? Because every 2 years people are up, and then every 6 years there's senators up. So every 2 years there's an election, even if there's not a president being voted on. Okay? And so it's like, not only do we have, these congressmen, Lindsey Graham, who's a senator, in charge of this committee, he's actually up for re-election. It's gonna be a tough one for him, right? There's a lot of people up. So he's heading this committee over the judiciary, and President Trump's up for re-election, and he just nominated this person, and she's getting nominated, and if she's confirmed, will she be up for election? Never again. Not that she was. This is a lifetime appointment. So all three branches are just like, how much political theater can you pack into, the news day with all three branches at play? So it's a very exciting time. Okay. Well, let's get a little boring here, and let's talk about things like, I said there are two things that Congress does. Okay. So before I do this, I want to remind us that we're going to talk a little bit about this, and if we can get back to the assignment I wanted you to have about the issues, we're going to try to revisit that. The daily issues, right? Going in the news. I had you guys do an assignment. I want you guys to be able to discuss that, if you recall. We're also going to deal with the political issues, the political platforms, right? Where they stand on the issues, right? My hope is that you guys have done some investigation into that, not just the what's, but the whys. Okay, why do you believe what you believe about this, and is it really a good reason to believe it? Who told you to believe this? Okay, have you heard the other side? Can you articulate the other side's point of view that is actually not a straw man argument? Like, give their strongest argument, not just, oh, well, those evil bastards don't like this. Okay, that's not a good side. That's not a good represent, because the opposition are not a bunch of guys twisting their mustaches going, even if your side is telling you they are. If we listen to Socrates at all from philosophy, we realize that people do things and they think they're right in doing them, for one, intellectually, and even when they do immoral things, they think they are morally justified in doing them. Okay? Make sense? So, huh? Oh, Euthyphro's dilemma. Is it in Euthyphro or is it in the Meno? Now you're testing me outside class. Now you're like, I don't know. You're the professor. You tell me. I'm like, all right.
Plato's 5 Dialogues. I think it's the first one though.
I got it in my bag. You want to look it up? I know it's in this 5 books. Either way. So yeah, the point is, we don't want to sit there and just go, you're just, the words that always pop up is you're a racist, right? I think that's overused. They're real racists, but not everybody's racist. Oh, you just hate women, right? If you disagree with me, you must hate women, don't you? No, that's, of course, you're like, no, I don't hate women, I like women, right? You're like, I'm dating one. Yeah, to oppressor. Right? And so you could hear people, that's not why, you like them, right? Okay. So, you hear these things thrown out way, 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 way too often. We don't want to be using, that's why we want to hear the other side's argument, like in abortion. Oh, you just hate women, you're just trying to oppress us by your abortion laws. No, I love babies, how's that? Okay, I love humans. Humans deserve the right to life. Guns, you just want to shoot me. No, I just want to defend myself, okay? You want to smoke pot, you're just a pothead. No, maybe I just don't want the government, putting all these people in jail. How's that? How's that? There's a good argument on both sides. Now which one is correct? That's a whole different statement, okay? So that's my point is, when we do this stuff, I wanna make sure. So the three things we're talking about is, we're gonna start with talking about how a bill becomes a law today. By start, we've been talking for about a half hour now. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about, the little current events and how they relate to the assignment of the platforms that you guys are dealing with. Because if you guys you're all of voting age as far as I know, and if you're going to be voting this semester, next 3 weeks, I really want you to be educated. Even if you disagree with me, I'd at least like you going in there going, okay, this is why I believe on this, and you could put it on a scale and ask yourself questions as to, be more informed, not only about the issues, but about why you believe these issues than the average citizen. And I honestly believe if you do the work in here, you'll have more of an education than you ever would at Harvard, not because they give you a bad education, but it's up to you, not up to them. Okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about a bill. What is a bill? There are two types of bills. And there are non-tax bills and there are tax bills. Taxes are there to create revenue for the government. That's how the government makes its money. The government is not a business. It does not make a profit. It does not contribute to the GDP, the gross domestic product. It is actually a liability.
I thought government spending did count towards GDP.
It goes towards the spending of it, but it doesn't go towards the creation of it. I mean, what product is the government creating? Is it an automobile manufacturer now does it create jobs? Yeah. But what is the product of those jobs? Bureaucracy. They are the result of passing laws that we have to do the paperwork for. Okay? Without laws governing how we drive, right, requiring driver's licenses, there would be no need for us to spend millions of dollars on the Department of Motor Vehicles Licensing Bureau, right? The people who say these are the rules of how to get in line and take your picture and fill out this form and don't smile, right? I walk away with a piece of paper and a bunch of forms that I don't see. So, I mean, if I give my money to, the car company, I walk away with what? A product. They've created a good. If I give it to a carpet cleaner, they've given me a service, right? The government, I mean, in a way, I guess you could say, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Tin Staffel. So when Bernie Sanders says free education, that's false. That's false. Free healthcare, false. That money, I do not work for free. Let's make that point clear. If I worked at a state university and you got all state universities, degrees and classes for free, first, that is false, because if I were there, I'd say, well, no, I'm not taking a $0 paycheck. I expect to be paid very handsomely, okay? So where would that money come from? It'd come from taxes, of course. So one of the types of bills has to do with taxes. Now, there are non-tax bills and there are tax bills. Now, bills can originate in either chamber with the exception of spending or tax bills. Not spending bills, but taxing bills. That is, we want to raise as much money. We're gonna, okay? So if it is a tax bill, that's going to be, attempted to be put into law, that has to originate in the House, okay? Non-tax bills can originate in the Senate. That makes sense. Now, bills can be simple, they can be complex, they can be short, and they can be long. Bills have tended to become a lot longer over the years. And depending on what it is, it can be very long. Now, who can create a bill? The answer is you. You can write a bill. You say, hey, I think this should be law. Think of a law you would like, or maybe think of a law you don't like. Okay? You could repeal. But think of a law you like. Can somebody come up with a law that they just off the cuff say, okay, That'd be funny if I came up with an assignment for all my students. Y'all have to come up, write a bill, and we'll see what we can do, okay? So, what would you write? What would you come up with? Is there any important issue to you? You gotta think of the issues, of course, but there are tons of them. I mean, from simple to mundane and, complex and crazy, or, federal laws, strike the letter Q from the English language, right? Something crazy like that. Who needs that, right? Quebecians in, Canada may not like us, but we say, well, that's just your English up there. We spell Quebec with a K now, KW, right? But what do you think? Give me something. Something. Give me something fun. I don't care.
Every person has to own an animal for emotional support.
Okay, yeah. Well, good. So it's not just, and of course there'd be some exemptions. You have to have an allergy to cats or something, and dogs, and
then you have a fish.
Or a fish or a snake, right?
Yeah.
And so of course it's for the public good, right? And it's for your own good. You own a snake, an emotional support python. It's hugging your leg really tightly. That python really loves you. It's gonna take you down.
Helps
All right.
with blood clots.
Huh?
Helps with blood clots.
Yeah, there you go. So, now you could write the bill. Now, and then you could go put it on your desk and then just sit there and gather dust. Can you introduce the bill? No, unfortunately you cannot. Well, yes you can, and no you cannot. You could introduce it to your representative or your senator and ask them to introduce it. So you say, hey, I got this bill, it's the emotional pet, requirement bill, and this is my reasoning behind it. And we got a whole political action committee here. We're gonna spend a bunch of money on your campaign if you basically support this bill, if you introduce this bill, and then you sponsor it, right? You want to be reelected. Now, this is going to be important, right? He wants to be reelected. You want your bill passed. There's a whole bunch of you, right? Okay. And so you go, why don't you introduce this bill we wrote? And then he goes and sponsors it, introduces it to committee, right? And so what committee would what are the committees and subcommittees to the point that would possibly require, where would that bill go? What committee would it go to? Well, she did talk about health, I guess, right? So it'd have to, whatever committee it went to, it would literally have to do whatever committee would be in charge of, say, the public health. How's that, right? Or maybe at least stray animals, okay? you know, so then you gotta find that group. Well, what's gonna happen there? Well, that just depends on who's in charge. Now, who's in charge of the committees?
Representatives.
Well, I mean, yeah, if we're in a house, it's generally the political party that has the majority is in charge of the committees. They have the chairmanship of the committees. Okay, so Lindsey Graham is a Republican and he is in charge of the Judiciary Committee, right? For the Senate. That right there should be an indication of who's in charge of the Senate. Basically, who has the majority of seats in the Senate. That would be what? What party?
Republican.
The Republicans, that's correct. Nancy Pelosi is is in charge of, dishing out chairmanships of the, House of Representatives. And she is a Democrat. So what, party affiliation will the chairs be in the House?
Democrats.
That's exactly it right there. And so you got people like Nadler and Schiff and other guys, and they're in charge of these committees, and what are they spending their time doing? Impeaching the president, right? And then so they impeach the president, it goes up to the Senate, and the Senate holds a trial, and then after they vote, the president's acquitted, of course. Why? Well, first, you could say first the charges were horrible, or two, you could say, it depends on what side of the aisle you're on, you can just say, well, they have the majority. And if you're a Democrat, you think, well, the Senate, those evil bastards, right? Like I just said earlier, because you don't look at the real reasons, the other side, the good arguments. You go, those guys, they're just helping him out. And of course, if you're, a Republican, you're those jerks in the, Congress, in the House, they're just abusing their power. And of course, on the other side, they're like, he's abusing, they're just leveling attacks at each other, right? Which is all fun when you have a split Congress like this. Okay, so now there becomes a problem. So you take your bill, and you better hope that the bill is one, pretty good, pretty bipartisan. What do I mean by that? It's gonna get votes from both sides. It's not gonna be so offensive like we're gonna outlaw the Republican Party or something like that. Yeah, I'm gonna vote for that. As Jim Jordan's like, yeah, good idea. Bipartisan. BI-partisan. Or you can skip the hyphen. Bipartisan. And that helps because then it's usually non-controversial. And so if it's non-controversial bills are kind of a little easier to, of course anything becomes controversial in an election year. But what is non-controversial in a non-election year becomes highly partisan in an election year. Partisan is when they're like, no, this is your side versus my side, right? So anything Trump does, like they're saying, you can cure cancer right now. And they'll be like, that jerk, he was holding back on this, right now he's not, there's nothing he could win on, I promise, nothing. The other side is just gonna be like, because it's an election year, they want him out so they put their person in. Politics is about power. Remember that. It's about getting power. President Obama said elections have consequences, and they do. And Amy Coney Barrett is exactly an example of that. The Democrats are really unhappy right now that they don't have the power to stop this nomination. And so all the claims that he shouldn't be doing this right now and all that stuff, no, he has the power to do it, and he can do it. Okay? The same would be true. If I'd be complaining too if I was on the other side of the aisle, but I wouldn't say he can't do it. I mean, they certainly can do it. They have the power. Because as President Obama said, politicals have, Elections have consequences. When you lose, you are not empowered. That's why we have elections, so that the person who wins gets to do what they want to do. Okay? And you try to balance that power out, of course, and that's part of how this works. So let's get back to the bill. You give your bill, right? And over to your congressman, and your congressman says, okay, I'm gonna sponsor this bill. And he goes, takes it to committee. Well, let's just pretend the committee chair is not on his side. Okay? And committee chair goes, oh, nice bill, thank you. One of the options this committee chair can do is just table it. Put it on the desk and slide it on over. Another thing that they can do is they could debate this bill, and let's pretend it somehow, after they vote on it in committee, it wins and it gets out of committee. Because if it, let's put it this way, if it cannot get out of committee, the chances of it passing on the floor, don't even waste your time. Why would you waste your time? That's why it's good to put a bill through committee first, because it's kind of good testing ground to see if it's actually a passable bill. If it passes through committee very easily, it's got a chance. Because there's many ways to kill a bill. Okay? And so one of them is just to table that committee, that bill, that legislation. So let's pretend it gets, of course it could be voted down in committee. That's another way it could be, a bill could be killed. So it could either be tabled, not even voted on, maybe discussed, or it could be voted down in committee. But then, let's pretend it gets through committee, and it actually reaches the floor, in which it gets to be actually voted on. Let's presume it passes cloture. That's the procedure on how they get started, okay? Get to the point of actually voting on the bill, and once you do, you get you get a simple majority passes the bill. Now, if that bill is passed, let's pretend it gets passed in the House, then it gets sent over to the Senate. Now, the Senate doesn't exactly, get that bill right away either, because once it goes through that, then it has to go. Let me see here. Yeah, I think it has to go back to that House's or Chambers committee, and then once that chamber passes it through their committee, which again, it could be what? Tabled, debated and passed, or debated and voted on and passed, or voted on and fails, right? It loses. Listen to this though. This is why Congress, it's such a hard thing to get things passed through Congress, is because we've got the House being controlled by the Democrats. You could kill a bill in committee just by tabling it, but let's pretend it gets through the House. You send it over to, let's pretend it passes with flying colors through the House. Then you send it over to the other chamber, which is owned and operated by the other party, and they're just like, thanks, we'll just put this over here to hold down the papers, turn it into a paperweight, start, throwing it around flying airplane, little paper airplanes. They could kill a bill that quickly that was worked on. But let's pretend it gets out of that committee. Well, then it goes to the floor of that chamber. In this case, we'll call it the Senate. And they vote on it. And if that bill then passes, now of course, it's, by the time it comes out of committee and stuff, it's a little different. It gets marked up. Okay, and the bill changes. Sometimes you have two different competing bills that are really the same law, but two different bills. Sometimes they have to go back and they have to reconcile these bills. They have to sync them up. Okay, so you have a whole other committee to do that. And then once that committee does that, then it has to go back to the chambers again, because then they're like, wait a minute, this isn't what I voted on, right? And so it could die there again, because they may not like the way it was synced up with the other one. And they're like, I'm not signing that. I would have signed the other one, but I'm not signing that. And the other guy's like, I would have signed this one, but I won't sign that one. And you're like, right? But let's pretend. Let's just pretend it actually gets passed. And then once it passes both chambers, it's going to be sent up to the president. So let's pretend Congress somehow is owned by the Democratic Party, and let's pretend they get the Senate on board, you know, and let's pretend they're let's say both chambers of Congress are owned by one party, right? We'll call that party the Democrats. No, let's go backwards. Let's pretend it's the Republicans that own it. Let's pretend there's a Democrat who's the president. We'll call that President Obama. Okay? So you've got the House and the Senate, and those are the Republicans, and then you've got the presidency, and there's Obama, and Obama's like, well, I don't like that bill. What's he gonna do?
Veto.
He can, and he has different ways of doing that. He can, one of the things he can do, let's pretend he can sign it. That's one option. Now, if he signs that, what does that what happens there?
It's a law.
Becomes a law. Very good. And that's how the Affordable Care Act came into power, okay? We didn't, Republicans were very upset about it, and they said they rammed this bill through. Well, they rammed it through because, as Obama said, elections have consequences, and he owned both chambers of Congress. They were all Democrats, not all of them, but they had the majority in both chambers. And, he was the president. Very easy to sign things into law when you've got both chambers, okay? The majority in both chambers, and you're the president, okay? The Republicans are like, we hate this, and then, we're gonna repeal it. And now they're all mad because they're afraid that, the law, they're gonna find out it's unconstitutional or something. That's why the judicial branch is all up in they're in a tizzy right now over Amy Coney Barrett. All right, that's one thing, signing the law. Okay, but then let's pretend he doesn't like it. Now he has two choices. One thing he can, let's say he's willing to let it become law, but he doesn't want to put his stamp of approval on it by signing it, right? One way to do that is if Congress is in session, and they have to be in session, if he tables it for 10 days and does not sign it, it becomes law, okay? However, he could veto it. That's another option. So he has two options of becoming a bill through presidential power or choice, I would say. Because the president absolutely doesn't want it to become law, he'll veto it. But if he just ignores it and allows it to become law without his signature, that's usually indicative that it's not a popular bill with his party, but maybe he may not even support it. But for political reasons, he's going to allow it to become law, and we'll discuss that in a minute. The second option is he vetoes it. How can a bill become law then? Well, then you need 2/3. It goes back down to the originating chamber. Like, let's say the bill originated in the legislative branch, the House of Representatives. And they get 2/3 on board with it. That would override, not yet, the veto. That would at least kick it back up to the Senate. And if you get 2/3 there, so you need 2/3 in both chambers to override a presidential veto. So let's pretend the president knows he's going to be overridden, but he doesn't want, it's going to become law, but it's kind of like, I'm still not going to put my name on this. It'll still become law. So he allows it to become law rather than to save the embarrassment of being overridden by Congress, okay? If that makes sense to you. Because you don't want to be embarrassed by Congress. I mean, you might be up for re-election. Or you just don't want your legacy tarnished. This is the guy who got all the vetoes overturned, man. But there's another way to kill a bill from the president. He could either veto it outright, and let's say Congress knows they can't, and by the way, it's very hard to get 2/3. Okay, 2/3 in one house is one thing, 2/3 in both houses is another. Very difficult. So the presidential veto is a very powerful tool. Okay, but for some reason, if he may allow it if Congress is in session to sit on the desk, metaphorically speaking, table it, and it will become law. However, if Congress is not in session, and he sits on it for 10 days, what happens then? It's vetoed. It's called a pocket veto. So he didn't officially veto it in the sense where he signed it, but it is what's called a pocket veto, okay? And the bill is, yippee, we did all this work. But I mean, look, this happens all the time. This is bills, like I said, you're like, that close, but not if the political party sometimes you get these bills sent up there and they're gonna die. And sometimes it may just be a political reason why you did it, to show how evil your opposition is. See, they don't like babies, so they vetoed the bill that protects babies, okay? You kind of get them on official record so that you can, in the next election, you say, President Trump likes eating babies, right? You know how they do that? And he voted to not help babies when Congress said, we want to help babies. Trump vetoed helping babies. And you're like, oh, that's bad. I should vote. Get that guy. I don't want babies. I like helping babies. Of course, the other guy's like, nah, I hate babies. Go Trump, right? That's not what they're thinking, right? They're thinking, BS, come on. All right. So those are some options. I mean, once it gets there, let's see if I got all that. Yeah. Let's go. I'm just going to roll down how bills can die just to make sure I got them all. Bill can be tabled, cannot pass in committee, it may not pass on the floor, right? It can pass one chamber and be killed in the other chamber's committees. Or it can pass one chamber and the other chamber's committees, and then it could die on the floor of that chamber. Like it can pass in the House, go over to the Senate, go through their committee, it can pass through that committee, and then it could end up on the floor in the Senate, it could die there. Conference committee is the committee that syncs the bills when you have the two similar bills. They put them together to make sure they say the same stuff. And of course that will have to go through both chambers, and that becomes a problem. And the bigger the bill is, the more difficult this is going to be to do, right? I mean, it's a lot of words, and meaning turns on specific words. So there you go. We're gonna do a little thing called port. So, oh, by the way, so how would I get people to vote for my bill, right? Now you're gonna obviously I could give it to a congressman. He could introduce a committee, and you go, oh yeah, and they go and they talk about the merits of the bill. Yeah, it sounds all well and good, but let's be honest with ourselves. Some of these guys are like, okay, I got a bill that's pretty unpopular, and you got a bill that needs votes. How about this, bub? I will vote on your bill if you vote on my bill, right? Not cool. This is not the way it should be. It's called log rolling. Okay? Huh? Log rolling. not really cool, but then some people, there are other ways to get bills to have support. And they call it pork barrel spending. Pork barrel is a slavery term, not pork barrel, but pork barrel spending. It comes from that practice where allegedly, okay? So before refrigerators, right? They stored meat, they cured it in salt and brine, okay? And they put them in these big barrels of brine, and the pork would be in there. And so when they fed, allegedly they opened up these things and fed the slaves, and the slaves would run to get it. And the first people there got the, first dibs on the best parts or whatever, okay? And the politicians from that time have been likened to the bum rushing the pork barrel, okay, to get out of the budget what they can, okay, because one thing politicians are good at is spending our money, okay, so you got the pork barrel full of money. And so one of the things they like to do is attach spending projects to bills. It's a way to get a bill supported. Is I will support your bill if you add this to it. This amount of spending to it that goes to my pet project or what. So let's take a bill that is going to, especially in a budget, that's going to dish out money to what? To say the highway system, the interstate system, and somebody from Kentucky's like, I'm not gonna support that unless you give me, because okay, let's put it this way: once Congress okays the budget, who spends it? The executive branch. They execute the law, right? You give the military the money, well, the military is governed by the executive branch, right? They're going to execute that. So what you might be doing is you might say, well, I give all this money over here. I just give the federal government all this money for highways and byways and the like, the interstate. But what about my crumbling streets in the, somewhere in Los Angeles? So you want to earmark some of that money and say this money has to go to this, my pet project. And I will not vote on this budget unless we earmark some of that money specifically for this. And you could go down pages of the federal budget for earmarks. They call it pork barrel spending. And there's a lot of complaints about all this because they believe it's an abuse that these guys are just getting they're getting the government to pay for their pet projects. Now, why would they do this? Well, because if they don't do it, they're probably not going to get reelected, right? If you elect me, I will give you money to fix the lights on your streets. Here in Houston, the potholes in Houston, right? Is that a federal problem? No, that's a city problem, right? So what if our congressional representatives said, look, we're not gonna vote on this budget unless you earmark some money to fix the potholes in Houston. The New Yorkers are going, I'm sorry, why would we want to spend our money, our New York money, our taxes up here, to go down there for your potholes? And we're like, hey, well, because we're not going to sign that bill unless we get it, right? If you want that thing to pass, for you to get your little earmarks, right? Well, guess what? You scratch my back on this one, I'll scratch your back. And then, we sign off on this thing. Now, the argument that can be made is this makes it easier for bills to pass, okay? It incentivizes people to sign the bill who otherwise might not have signed the bill, okay? On the other hand, it can be very cynical that I have to pay for the like for example, right now, one of the earmarks in, well, one of the things going on in California, you know, their state's in trouble because they have all this money committed to their retirement systems that's not funded that well because they've overtaxed their citizens have left, and they're having a shortfall. They're not making enough, and the government's not bringing in enough money they're spending more than they're bringing in, okay? And they want to keep raising taxes, which makes people leave, and when they leave, they have less tax. So when they have less tax, they have less money. They're just creating a bigger problem. And so they're asking, when like Nancy Pelosi is asking, when it comes to this bailout of this stimulus package for the COVID relief fund, well, they want all this money that's going to go towards their failing retirement systems. And people are like, wait a minute, what does that have to do with the, you know, with COVID? It doesn't. What it has to do with is we're not going to be on board with any bill that doesn't bail us out. And the complaint is you're holding up COVID relief because you guys couldn't control your own spending, all right? And I mean, she's not going, yeah, and she's not doing that. I mean, she'll kind of say something else. But the bottom line is that's kind of the way it works. And so you can become very cynical. I like very simple bills, but simple bills are not that simple because they're hard to pass. Because they're easy to kill. Because there are many bills out there that really aren't going to relate to a whole lot of other people. And they're like, oh, why should I get on this? Why should I stick my political neck out for you? Does that make sense? When I say, why should I stick? Because you put your name on a bill, you're on record. So, unless there's and you know, politicians are some of the, you know, they can be quite greedy in this regard. They're out to do one thing. What is the one thing politicians are out to do?
Power.
Yeah, they got to be elected. That's what I was gonna say. To get the power, they need to be elected. But you have the first number one job of a politician is get elected. Until you're elected, you're not a politician. I mean, or you may be a politician, you failed one, but you know, a defeated one, I should say, not a failed one. But so yeah, so you're not going to do anything until you get elected, and you don't want to ruin your chances of being re-elected once you're there. And so you got, you know, sometimes towing the fire. Are we running out of time?
We have 50 minutes.
50 minutes. That's a great segue into the other two sections. Okay, so because I got through that, all right. We talk about different committees at different times, like the Budget Committee and the Appropriation Committee, which, by the way, are probably the most powerful committees out there. Now, we talked the other day about some of the issues in the election and the platforms, specifically the platforms. What'd you guys come up with? We had talked about, let me give you a refresher, as they would say, if you're being questioned here. Let me refresh your memory. Talk about abortion, the Second Amendment, talk about religious liberty, same-sex marriage. All of these, by the way, are being discussed with you know, this judicial nomination, Amy Coney Barrett. Talked about that today: abortion, Second Amendment, religious liberty, same-sex marriage, the economy. We talked a little bit about socialism versus capitalism. Foreign affairs, we talked about how we deal with Russia, China, Iran, Mexico, and Canada. I know that sounds weird that we're going to go invade Mexico. Energy, the Green New Deals, renewables, oil and gas. Should we get rid of oil and gas? If we got rid of oil and gas, is it possible that solar, wind, and hydro is actually better for the environment? Have you thought about that? You haven't. You've been told that it is, but is it? I mean, birds probably don't like all these windmills that they keep flying into and dying, okay? It's had devastating effects on bird populations. Hydro kills fish, stuff like that. And by the way, it all destroys you go out there and see a wind farm, you're like, dang man, these things are ugly. That's why there's the acronym NIMBY, not in my backyard. And then you also have the oil and gas it takes to create these things. You need all the precious metals and minerals to create these solar panels, which means you've got to dig huge holes in the earth and diminish our reserves of that. You also have to use oil and gas to operate the machinery. So you go, oh, this isn't as environmentally friendly as it. You kill all these trees to put up your solar farms and your wind farms, and you're like, oh my God, man, we're so it's kind of a rob Peter to pay Paul kind of thing going on. It's not as simple as they want it to be. If all these this lady called me up the other day trying to sell me solar, and I totally convinced her that solar's evil. And I said, and I'm like, okay, it's not that evil, but okay. But I gave her this third degree. I was like, yeah, what about all the holes in the earth? You're talking about the environment. Yeah, what about the rainforests that are getting cut down, and what about all the oil that's being used to, mine and to, and all this stuff. She's like, oh, I never thought about that. Of course you didn't think about it. You're selling me solar, right? You're trying to sell me on how good it is for the environment, but is it really? Immigration, we talked about that. Healthcare. There's good and bad for immigration. We need immigration for some things. For other things, it becomes a burden on our society. You bring in the vast, vast majority of people who want to come into our country are not skilled labor. Okay, they're not physicians, and they are not, doctors, lawyers, and architects and engineers. The vast majority of them are people who are, really just not able to make it in the countries from which they come. They, whether it be from Honduras or I don't know. I mean, wherever they come, and then you go, well, and they all. One of the arguments is, well, Americans aren't willing to do those jobs. Is that true? Is it true that Americans are unwilling to do construction jobs? I was certainly willing to do construction jobs when I was young. I couldn't get a construction job right now if I wanted to, because I would charge too much. I would be literally being paid more than minimum wage. And I don't even know if some of these guys on the crews right now are getting paid minimum wage, because a lot of them are under the table. Why are they under the table? Because a lot of them are illegal immigrants. Okay? And so you go, so you hear that old statement, they took our jobs. Well, some of the jobs they did take. They're not taking the lawyer jobs. They're not taking, some are. We've got immigrants we want to come in, say chemists and engineers and computer scientists and stuff, highly, highly skilled jobs. And it's hard to bring them over. They're already getting paid decent, wages where they are. But the people coming over were like, if you have more of something, it is worth more or less. What?
If you have more of something, it's worth less, right?
Right, yes, that's correct. And so labor is the highest cost of any business. You have twice the labor pool. What does that do to the value of the laborer?
Happens it.
Brings down, right? So Americans who live here, when they see people coming in and they're just opening the floodgates of labor in their market, what's your market going to be? What are you going to be for a career?
I have a job right now.
What's your job?
I'm a technical engineer for an insurance company. I troubleshoot all day on phones.
Okay. I heard engineer. I'm like, oh, awesome. But they're not rolling open the door for all the engineers to come in. They probably are, but they're not as many coming in, right? But all of a sudden, you find yourself, you go down to the Home Depot and you see the day laborers out there, and they're out there, all code for free or whatever. They're not for free, but for under the table. That's not happening in your field. But in construction, it's definitely happening. And the types of people who generally feel the rub of this in America, the types of Americans who feel it, are those who are in fields that are that require less college and less technical skills. So if you were to become a carpenter, it's harder. Those are the fields that's going to end up flooding into. Labor is going to, general labor. And we have a lot of those people in America, don't we? I mean, if you look at who does the yards, anybody could go do a yard business. I had a yard business when I was a kid. No kid is doing that anymore at all. No 13-year-old boy is learning how to run his own business by pushing his lawnmower around the neighborhood to get the neighbors to let him do their yards. Right? So there's a couple, I'm sure, right?
My brothers.
Are they doing well?
Yeah.
How old are they?
My brother just turned 60.
16? Okay.
And my other one is like 17. They're
Uh-huh.
like 16 and 17.
Yeah. So they have a car, truck.
Yeah, they have two. They've actually been doing, especially my younger
So
brother.
they're not pushing it around like I did.
Like
at
walking
age
around the
11,
neighborhood.
12.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm not saying, but I mean, those kind of jobs are harder to get now.
Right.
Your brother, eventually you're gonna move on,
Right.
maybe,
Mhm.
unless business is good.
Mhm.
But it might have been a lot better if you cut the labor pool in half. So that's one of the arguments. You flood the market of something, the value of it goes down.
Right.
And so who's really feeling what demographics in America are being hit hardest by this? Childcare, okay? My wife, home cleaning, my mom cleaned houses, okay? So these are fields that would not, would be very difficult for them to thrive in. Childcare, home care, stuff like that, if given the quantity of people now.
Right. I'm a nanny, so. I
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
So you can understand.
Yes.
You got a lot of competition, I promise you that.
Yeah.
Especially for people now who want their child to be multilingual.
Yes.
Do you speak any other language?
I don't.
So there you go. My nanny comes in and she goes, I go, hey, can you teach my kids Spanish? They're like, yeah. I got another friend, their nanny teaches their kids Chinese. Chinese.
So.
I'm convinced she's a spy. I'm joking.
Wait,
I taught a class on espionage, so I see a spy behind every corner. So yeah, these are some of the things. So that's an issue. I'm just throwing the issues out there, okay? Remember, there are two sides, okay, to the debates. Healthcare, should the government give it to you? And by give it to you, I mean, should they be in control of it? Should they tax us, take our money, set up healthcare, and everybody gets it, quote, without having a direct bill, but their bill is indirectly paid through what? Taxes. The only difference is now is when the government gets involved, what does the government do? Governs. So when they provide your health care, they govern your health care. They make choices. They're the ones. Do you want more or less choice in your health care? Well, we talk about pro-choice, but the only time, certain people are on the, fighting for pro-choice is when it's, for abortion. What about pro-choice for education and pro-choice for health care, When it's private, when you pay for it, you make the decisions. When it's public, you have less control, okay? You ask for permission, okay? When you own it, you dictate. It's like your business. If you're the boss, you make the decisions. Whether they be good decisions or bad decisions, they are your decisions. When you are the employee, you ask for permission, okay? Lack of control. So where does control lie? In the hands of the government or in the hands of the people? Now, is government required? Yeah, in some things, but not all things. Come on, and to what level? That's the debate in politics right now. So get to know those. Education, I just talked about choice, right? Talked a little bit about the Electoral College. Some people want to get rid of it. Is that good for Texas or bad for Texas? Texas is one of the strongest states in the nation as far as electoral votes go, but if we got rid of the electoral college, we'd probably really that'd be nullify our power right away. Okay. And by the way, the smaller states would want to keep that because that helps them keep some power. All right. Anybody drugs? Should we legalize some drugs, no drugs, or all drugs? Should marijuana be legal? Now it's on a those are platforms. You know, you could pretend you're like this staunch Republican, right? You're like, a staunch Republican, but I still think one could say, oh, I still think certain drugs should be legal. Just for, not because the drug is good or not because it's not bad, but because the cures for that drug is worse than the drug itself, right? Putting people in jail has caused more pain than the smoking of marijuana has caused. You go, and you know, with the drug cartel, you know, this is one I threw out the other day. I think that's a legitimate argument for that. I'm not, like I said, and I'm not even advocating for the legalization of it or for the use of it. I'm just saying that would be it. I think it's a pretty good argument. I know it's a good debate to have. You know, there's some laws, some things we shouldn't do, but it would make things worse if we tried to forbid the doing of those things. If that makes sense, right? You know, should we throw people in jail for littering? I hate littering. I watch people throw stuff out their car and I just will pick it up and hand it back to them, right? And then the guy gets out of the car and I'm like, yeah, I'll take it for you, thanks. I've seen that happen, right? Things go badly for you if you start enforcing the law on your own. So you want people really, you know, make it like Singapore. You put a piece of, you know, you can't chew gum anymore. People spit their gum out on the sidewalk and it makes things look bad. People don't like things that look bad, so they make it against the law. You get caught with a piece of gum, you get fined. You get caught, you know, littering, you get thrown in jail. Is that good? And then you cause a whole criminal class of people. Actually, I think Singapore is pretty safe, but I'm not saying we should live like that. But anyway, throw a bunch of people in jail for chewing gum. What you in for? Chewing gum. Ooh. I'm just in for murder. All right. Okay. So there were three things I wanted to deal with. Current events, which some of that is baked into the you know, political platforms and what's going on. Talked a little bit about that anyway. The process of a bill becoming law, and then finally, again, the platforms. What do you guys think? Anything interesting happening in the world that we should know before I kick you out in 1 minute? I covered it all, everything? Okay, sounds good. All right, in that case, keep up the good work. Is anybody behind on anything? If you are, get in contact with me, okay? All right, now you can hit it.